church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you're listening to this podcast today. And gosh, for me, I am so happy to have my friend and colleague back on, Justin Bohner, the assistant pastor at First Baptist Church in Highlands, North Carolina. Welcome back, Justin.
Glad to be here, Dennis.
Yeah, I am just kind of like a lot of people in America right now, sort of shocked at the fact that tens of thousands of mostly young people, as one pundit said, marching in the streets for murderers and barbarians. I want to set the stage a little bit for our discussion and for our listeners. You know, way back on May 15th, 1948, the armies of 5 neighboring Arab states invaded the new state of Israel, which had declared its independence on the previous day. And since that time, there have been many, many attacks on Israel by neighboring Arab states. And I think, as almost all of us surely in the United States know, on October 7th of this year, the Palestinians, led by the terrorist group Hamas, invaded Israel by land, sea, and air, killing nearly 2,000 innocent civilians, which included 30 Americans, and beheaded babies. And even it's reported that even one baby was cooked in an oven, women raped and beaten, and some 200 people taken as hostages. This was, by every measure, one of the most barbaric attacks on innocent people that we've seen in modern times. And Hamas, the elected leaders of the Palestinians, have openly declared it's their goal to eradicate Jews, and they seem to be supported in this goal, both monetarily and in every other way, by the nation of Iran. And so it creates a difficulty. And of course, Israel responded militarily with the goal of eradicating Hamas, not the Palestinian people, but Hamas, the ones who led this barbaric attack. And it appears that Israel's gone to great lengths to try to protect the Palestinian people that Hamas uses as human shields. And Israel is doing everything they can to facilitate aid getting into that country, water, food, and oil, and other things. And as I said in the beginning, it's just shocking to me that we have tens of thousands of young people marching in the streets and on campuses in support of Hamas and the Palestinians. Have you had the same reaction?
Yeah, I mean, to say the least, it's just a fascinating situation that we find ourselves in, where we have people, and largely, yes, as you've already stated, young people, who are marching and protesting in support of something that they have really no idea about. I think that that's one of the major crux of the issue, is that they are so far removed from reality, being on a secular liberal school campuses, the majority of these things. They're so far removed from reality that they have no real idea what's at stake and what's actually happening when they hold up these signs. And it's an incredibly disheartening thing to see, but it's also just the sheer fact of, if you took any number of these people who are holding up these signs and are shouting things like Allahu Akbar and are marching in these protests, if anyone, choose any one of those students, young people, and send them over there and have them hold up one of those signs to the Palestinians that they claim to support, and the exact horrific things that you just described are exactly what would happen to them.
I think
And
so.
so people are so disconnected by this, and they think that they're supporting this some sort of justice, but what they're really supporting is a spiritual, demonically spiritual war that's happening over there. And I think people are just so far removed, they have no idea what's going on. So yes, the long of the short is, it has been surprising, and it's eye-opening to see the state of a lot of the young people in this country.
I know, some people I run into. In fact, I was having lunch with a man at a lunch counter, and this subject came up, and he kind of reacted like I hear a lot of people say, is that there's no possible reason or explanation to explain this embracing of barbaric cruelty. And then, as you've alluded to, for a long time, people in this country have discussed the fact that there's a cultural war going on in America, a battle of the cultures. In Christian circles, we often say there's a spiritual war going on, good versus evil, and I really personally believe that that's exactly what we're seeing unfold before our eyes. And what's interesting to me, I mean, you mentioned the demonic side of this, and it does appear that there's a sort of a demonic pall that's shrouding all of the cultural attitudes in our country, and is draping the sensibilities of people. And when we think about the demonic, oftentimes people think of someone being possessed by a demon. And that happens. We know that happens, but also many theologians have written about the fact that Satan, the satanic forces in our culture, have the ability to organize a demonic movement, and that's I think that may be what we're seeing before our eyes.
Well, I agree 100%. I think one of the major things, like when we say something like good versus evil, light versus darkness, one of the biggest things that we have to remember is that the Bible gives no third party other than good versus evil, right? There is no third, right? The myth of neutrality, right? There is no third party. You're either in the kingdom of God or you're in the kingdom of darkness. And I think that what we find here in this is that many people think that they're fighting in some sort of third party, right? That a lot of these young people marching to support death and destruction, and marching to support, I mean, even abortion that we see in our country, they're not trying to do it in the name of Satan. They're trying to do it in the name of women's rights, or in the name of justice for Palestine. And what they're actually doing, unbeknownst to them, is that they're walking along the path that the devil wants them to walk on, walking right along the way that these demonic forces want them to, and they're influencing thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And I think that has become, in a lot of ways, the majority in our culture and in our nation.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that, and I'm certainly not the first one to say this, but the demonic, we're talking about the demonic, there always seems to be a lie, L-I-E, a lie that proceeds the intent to destroy. We watched this happen, with Adam and Eve in the garden in Genesis 3, where Satan, through the serpent, comes to them. He tells them a lie. Which, as we know, led to the great fall in the Garden of Eden and the destruction of mankind. And then you think about the Jewish nation itself, where the lies that were told about the Jewish people that facilitated the Holocaust. And it's always the lie that seems to proceed this kind of demonic things that begin to happen in society. Now, you and I, through some of our education and through some of our discussion, at times have talked about this thing that in divinity schools they call, in philosophy schools they call postmodernism, which is really just the whole philosophy that there is no real truth except what each of us get to decide. And, it's these kind of ideas and philosophies that's a variant of Marxist socialist thought. And then when you read about, all of the things that a guy like Karl Marx proposed, he basically felt like everything that exists needs to perish, needs to go away. He didn't mean that it all should go away. He meant that it all deserves to go away. And so it's this kind of thinking that, if you embrace that kind of thinking, which seems to have invaded our schools of higher education, then it's easy to propose the destruction of something like Israel.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very fatalistic worldview that has crept in largely through the education system. But like you said, it all is fundamentally rooted in the idea of postmodernism, that there is no objective truth, that all truth is subjective and subjected to your own feelings and your own emotions and your own opinions, that there is no absolute truth. And that's what is twisting and bending the minds of so many people today, because they have no standard of truth. Every standard of truth is based upon every individual person in the world's standard of truth, and that gets us absolutely nowhere, right? We have no standard by which to judge anything at all. One person who's a murderer and a psychopath might think it's just fine and dandy what's being done to those children over there in Israel. But for someone who does have a standard, it's horrific. But how do we ever call it good or bad, right or wrong, if nobody has any objective standard that does not ever shift and does not ever change? And we know that we have that, which is the Bible, and we have that, which is God. But these other people, the world and in society today have, some people say, both feet firmly planted in midair.
Right. This kind of thinking has led to what some theologians, even out of the papal office of the Catholic Church, have begun to call a culture of death. This whole idea that that everything deserves to be torn down, and they've begun to call it a culture of death. Where all things need to be dismantled. Histories, stories, heroes, heroines. We've seen this across America, where all of these historical statutes being torn down in our country, and the literal history of our country being changed so that it meets some kind of current thought. And you couple all of that with this, what you're talking about, this unrestrained postmodern individualism, where everybody gets to, can embrace this culture of death, and at the same time say, I get to decide what is worth existing and what's not worth existing. And so, we end up with a situation where we've got the nation of Israel being attacked by a lot of people, and tens of thousands of young people in America marching in the streets to support it.
It's mind blowing, but then I was in a Bible study a few weeks ago talking to a brother, and somebody in there mentioned, it's just horrific to think about the thousands of people that were killed over in Israel, and all this danger to the children. And I just kind of quipped off the cuff. I said, that many children die in a week in America. I mean, we've become so desensitized that many children die in a week in their
Right.
mother's womb here
yeah.
where we live.
Yeah, see, and there, this whole sort of culture of death where children are being killed in the womb, almost like it's a sacred right of the young people of this country. And so, why would the young people have any qualms about babies being beheaded in this Palestinian attack when they have been sort of told it's morally okay to kill babies in the womb all the way up to conception in our country? It's demonic. It's a demonic thought. It's how this demonic movement begins to suppress the sensibilities of people.
If you just do a quick survey of the Bible and look at the Old Testament, do a quick survey of the book of the Kings, right? Look at the books of Chronicles, look at the historical books. Pagan, ungodly, godless, wicked nations are always marked by a disregard for human life. They are always marked by a disregard for human life, a rejection of God, an elevation of self, and a disregard for human life, especially the life of children. Right? Especially
right.
The life of children. Every pagan culture across the Old Testament and many, many cultures in world history have been marked by the sacrifice of their children.
That's right. That's
And
exactly
yes,
right.
it absolutely is all demonic. And I think too many of us are afraid to mention the fact that it is, in fact, demonic.
Right. You don't hear that. If you're listening to the news about what's going on right now, about the marches in our streets, or about this attack, you won't hear those words. Ephesians 6:12 describes this warfare that you and I are discussing, where it tells us that, our war is against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And so, the Bible is warning us that this kind of spiritual battle is going to take place. You mentioned earlier that, our young people seem to have lost their rational and moral compass by what they're being exposed to, not just in the universities, but now in the K through 12 grades, across America, that they've been, their ability to be rational and understand moral obligations has been distorted by these demonic ideas that seeped into the fabric of our culture. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when you look at it, not to most people will just immediately label you as a conspiracy theorist or something of that nature, but it's when you look at this whole system that you're talking about and you look at how young age and goes all the way up into the impressionable college age, and then by then it's already inculcated into everybody by the time they reach adulthood. It's almost like it's that way on purpose, right? It's almost like it works exactly that way for a reason, right?
Right.
We think about the ruler of this world, and not to get too highbrow theological, but we look at how does Satan operate in this world? Well, we look at some places in the South Sudan. Guess what? There's a lot of physical, visible manifestations of demonic attack. Well, that doesn't happen in America, so I guess the devil's not here. No. He's just smart and does things differently.
Right.
He does things differently here. He works through the education system. He works through social media. He works through the media in general, right? The devil is smart in the way that he lures and attacks and garners support for his wicked cause.
Well, right. And, it's this culture of death that I've been alluding to, where it's easy for the young people of America just to embrace this whole idea of that everything needs to be torn down and something new put in our place. You know, I saw one theologian who was writing about this, and he was asking the question, can our young people be suffering from the noetic effect of sin? Now, that's a word that you see pop up in divinity schools, the noetic effect of sin. It simply means that sin, life of sin can cloud the ability to think and reason and impair the ability to sort things out, resulting in skepticism and unbelief, especially things involving God.
Well, I think that's one of the aspects of the noetic effect of sin that not too many people think about in the Christian world, and that is that the closer the unbelieving, unregenerate person gets to God, the further clouded and the greater the veil is over their eyes. So the further people try to drill down to what even is morality, actually, that's the more and more and more blind that they're becoming due to their sin. Because what they're looking at, they're looking for the source of morality, and the source of morality is God. And fundamentally, their biggest problem is their relationship with God is broken. So the closer they get to God, the more blinded that they become, and that's exactly what it is. I think that's a great way of thinking about it, is that people are drilling down and trying to find the center of all of these basic principles of life, but what they're doing is they can't see what's right behind them, which is God and his standard of morality and his standard of right and wrong.
Right. You know, I love what the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 1, actually 18 through 26, when he wrote, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of God's invisible quality, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so the people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God or gave thanks to him, but thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals, reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in sinful desires of their heart to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than their Creator, who's forever praised. Oh man, this is the Apostle Paul talking about what happens. You know, it's really what we're talking about. Paul in the first century is really talking about the noetic effects of sin, how it completely clouds your thinking, just as you were talking.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we see right there in the beginning of that section in verse 18 of Romans 1, that it says they suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. You know what's plain? A child, whether it's inside the womb or outside, is still a child.
That's right.
But they suppress the truth of that fact by what? By their wickedness, their own sinfulness and their own sinful desires to have autonomy over self and to be their own God rules over the clear, plain truth that a child is a child, and that child has a right to life, whether inside the mother or outside.
Right. And, you know, that's true of the whole abortion thing, but it's also true regarding so many other matters. You know, the demonic affects us in so many ways. I mean, you can be very educated, a person of higher learning and all of that, and really, in the eyes of God, be totally dumb and stupid by the impact of
Foolish.
Of sin. Foolish, yeah, foolish as a thing that says. All of these leaders that we see. I mean, it's not just young people, but it's mostly young people, and that we see marching in the streets. And we've seen on our television screens college professors and even members of our own Congress stepping out and supporting this barbaric attack of Hamas. I mean, even some world leaders saying, well, this is all justified because they are some kind of an oppressed people. Thomas Sowell and Paul Hollander in their book Political Pilgrims wrote that many intellectual leaders embrace the Hamas barbarity as a result of unrestrained emotional forces that lead to poor moral judgments, a deficit in common sense, and this thing we're talking about, a philosophical sort of presupposition of moral relativism. In other words, you get to decide what's right or wrong, and then idealizing things like socialism and Marxism and other forms of government. And then lastly, they say an occult of victim mentality. Now that's interesting. In other words, these writers are saying that a lot of this is due to this cult of a victim, where the university students are being taught that you have to be an oppressor or a victim, one or the other.
Yeah. And that's what all goes back to Marx and socialism and communism. That was one of Marx's big ideas, was dividing the entire world into oppressed and oppressor classes, and that if you have something, you achieved it by ill means, and that means that you're therefore an oppressor, and you should stop oppressing and give everything you've taken because you're an oppressor to the oppressed. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but 99% of people that embrace Marx's ideologies, like these children on school campuses, 99% of them put themselves in the oppressed class, right? You don't see many walking around saying that they're oppressors, right? They're all in the oppressed class, and that bleeds over exactly to Palestine and Israel, right? Hamas and Israel, in saying that Hamas is some sort of oppressed class. There's some oppressed people, so therefore they are justified in violently, as Karl Marx was totally okay with, violently getting retribution on the so-called oppressors, being Israel.
Yeah.
Right? We see that on in so many areas of life that it's poisoned the watering hole, to use that kind of terminology, in the entire world.
Well, sure. I mean, all Hamas had to do is convince the world, the young people, that they are oppressed, They refer to themselves as occupying the world's largest open-air prison. They've painted this picture of themselves, and so it's pretty easy to win support of our young people if you're viewed as the oppressed group, and that all you're trying to do is break out of that oppression. So, this boils down to having our young people seeing the world in terms of the victims and the oppressors, and there's only one factor involved, and that's your power. Whoever has the more power economically and politically, you're morally guilty. If you are some kind, and so here we have, Israel, which is economically self-sufficient and politically responsible, and a very successful society. In the court of leftist public opinion, Israel is a guilty nation that deserves to be eradicated.
Absolutely. And it's, we have to say that nobody is totally innocent on either side of any battle, right? We all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But
Right.
that in no way means that one nation is then permitted to terrorize or commit acts of terrorism on another country, right? I mean, that's just what is mind-blowing to me, is that nobody was marching in the streets of New York City protesting for Iraq whenever, on 9/11.
That's right.
Right? Because they saw it as an act of terror, right? They attacked civilians.
Yeah.
It wasn't war, right? Well, what are we seeing right now? They immediately aimed for civilians. They're they're in tunnels underneath the city, hiding behind civilians so that when people come in, the civilians get shot and not them.
That's
right?
exactly
They're taking people hostage. And it's what they're supporting is not war. What they're supporting, they're protesting and rioting in favor of a terrorist organization.
Sure. You know,
right? And it's totally justified to them if
Right.
it means that the underdog rises up against the big dog, right?
That's right.
It's completely twisted.
Yeah. You know, I said earlier in this podcast that the lies always precede destruction. And so you sit back and you look at this demonic movement that's occurring in the United States. And as you alluded to earlier, you know, we've lied to our young people about the morality. We as a society have lied to our young people about the morality of killing babies in the womb. You know, we've lied to the young people in this country about that marriage can be something other than a relationship between a man and a woman. We've lied to young people when we've told them it's possible for you to change your sex. You know, we've lied to our young people when we told them it's impossible to define a woman. You know, we've lied to our young people about what you and I have been talking about this whole thing about people with power are oppressors and should be destroyed. And we've lied to our young people when we've told them that you can be determined whether you're racist simply by the color of your skin. Or we've lied to them when we told them it's okay for biological men to compete in sports with biological girls. And so all of these lies that have been promulgated and aimed at our young people, it's no wonder that we're seeing the results.
And you know, we look and we say, what does Jesus call Satan? He calls Satan the father of lies.
Right.
Right? The whole thing is a lie. I mean, to point back at Hamas, the entire foundations of the Muslim religion are a lie. It's a lie that says Ishmael is the right heir of Abraham, right? Not Isaac.
Right.
So the Arabs are the heir, not the Israelis, right? The whole thing is promulgated on a lie, and so we see that happening over there in that country. We see it happening over here, as you just referred to. Yeah, these are only a handful of the lies that have been spread and told, right? You could dovetail off either one of these and go into 100 more.
I know.
And it's a culture of lies and misinformation, and the lack of truth tellers speaking forth in the public square, regardless of the consequences, has largely contributed to allowing these lies to continue being purported.
You know, Pastor Justin, you know, great philosophers of the past have warned us that there's a great malaise that's coming where deep down in our souls we sense that things that were worth pursuing. The things that made men and women great in the past are no longer interesting or even worth taking the time for. So a culture begins to develop where, people have no great conviction or individual passion about anything. And so they end up being easily stoked by this woke media that we talk about so much. And we sort of gradually become a society where there are just no strong beliefs or great causes to fight for. This sort of malaise and resignation in our society. This may be the most disturbing reason why so many young people are out in the streets supporting a terrorist group like Hamas. Now, why do I say that? Yeah, let me just say this. Why do I say that? Because Hamas, regardless of these barbaric tactics, they represent something that in the West no longer exists. They have real conviction, a cause worth dying for, and a purpose worth killing for. And sadly, this is not just the elimination of Jews, but their intent is a global jihadist movement. And so it's so empty. So easy for sort of empty-headed, empty-hearted Westerners to just get caught up in this whole demonic movement. As we get toward the end of this podcast, Pastor Justin, it's been a delight having you on here today. And I know in your ministry you spend a lot of time with young people, and in your past you've spent a lot of time with young people. And I want to just sort of begin to end our podcast by leaning on some of the thoughts in Senator Ted Cruz's newest book, Unwoke. Marxism and socialism and this culture of death has captured every place where the transmission of ideas occurs, from K-12 through the universities to big tech to big business to science and to entertainment. And I would suggest that, fortunately, these ideas really only survive in darkness. And, the more of us who stand up, shine the light, and speak the truth, the more readily that we are ready to take our country back. I'm convinced that America remains a God-fearing, center-right country, and that our people have a deep reservoir of common sense. And every time one of these woke abuses is exposed, more and more people wake up to the threat. And more of us are fighting back. And Americans are smart, strategic, and relentless. And I really believe that they will take America back. For believers in Matthew 5, we're told that we believers are the light of the world. That we're told to let our light shine for others, that they may see our good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven. So I am not the least bit discouraged by what I see unfolding. In fact, I'm seeing more and more people, even among newscasters, who are ready to take a stand for some of the crazy, irrational things that are a part of this demonic movement. And I would urge our listeners today, if you're listening to this today, when you leave this podcast, you go out and make sure you're one of the lights that's shining on the darkness in this country. Now, I want to thank my friend Justin Bohner for being with me today, and I look forward to having you back on soon in the future, Pastor Justin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis.